Hello. Today we will discuss the principles of effective communication and apply that to things that you will want to consider when entering into conversations and dialogues with parents and other professionals in the classroom. When you decided you wanted to be a teacher, chances are your image of parent-teacher communication was similar to the top right photo. You envisioned that you were going to establish healthy, positive relationships with each and every family you work with. But remember, as we have discussed earlier in this course, there are several factors impacting families of children with disabilities that may interfere or change their willingness to engage in certain conversations. You may actually get looks like the bottom right photo, where you feel much more like an opponent and like you are not getting your idea across. The ideas presented in Friend and Cook's Chapter 8 indicate why I have chosen the particular framework for the interview project you will engage in during this class. Inevitably, I will have several students ask why they can't just interview a family that they know from home through email. I understand that this seems like the most convenient option for you and the family, but I need to introduce to you the actual rationale behind my answer. As Friend and Cook explain, there are several differences between simultaneous and unilateral communication. When engaging in simultaneous communication, you can access all parts of communication, including not only words, but noises, facial expressions, and stance of the communicator. Take this stance, for instance. You wouldn't possibly be able to see this during unilateral communication. What might this stance tell you in simultaneous communication? What about this same stance? She has her arms crossed, just like the last picture. But what does the understanding of facial expression add to the understanding of stance? So often, someone will say that arms crossed alone means only one thing. That is not true. What could this person be thinking? Yet another photo with a person with her arms crossed. What could this person be thinking, feeling? It is important that you understand that seeing all nonverbal parts of communication is critical to understanding the full communication. Of course, we have all heard this phrase and have perhaps even thought it. It is, indeed, sometimes hard to control what is written all over your face. As professionals, you must try to learn to control facial expressions that may be misinterpreted by professors, colleagues, and parents. When we consider that a major portion of our jobs as teachers and professionals depends on communication skills, it becomes an essential skill that we need to work on developing. The first and perhaps least intuitive skill to develop is the skill of listening. Listening is essential to good communication. You must be able to listen to the communication partner and move beyond several of the factors that can lead to ineffective communication. Several of the factors listed in the Friend and Cook chapter were our tendency to daydream, begin rehearsing our response instead of listening attentively, stumbling on hot words, filtering messages that we aren't necessarily interested or engaged in, or getting distracted by extraneous details. I think we can all admit to these factors becoming an issue in classes or lectures, but take a minute to think about how this might negatively impact your relationship with other professionals and colleagues, as well as with the parents you're working with. How might these things manifest in nonverbal or verbal communication breakdowns? Minimal encouragers are another skill you can develop when working on communication skills. Minimal encouragers are both verbal and nonverbal and include words, phrases, silence, and nonverbal cues to indicate that you are listening and understand what the communication partner is saying. Encourage them to keep communicating. There are several things that you can do to encourage communication through these minimal cues. Can you think of an example? Simply nodding, smiling, saying or yes are common minimal encouragers people use in this culture. An additional consideration for communication is for you to think about the level of language you are using. With an increase in abstraction, there is also more room for interpretation. If possible, you want to increase the concreteness in your communication, especially with those adults you may be in a supervisory position over, like paraprofessionals or teacher aides, and with parents. If you leave room for interpretation, each party may interpret your message differently. It is also very important that you demonstrate openness in your responses and minimal encouragers. If a communication partner feels like they are being judged or evaluated, the communication will likely stay at a shallow or insufficient level for relationships of respect. While often given in conversation, the giving of unrequested suggestions and advice often has little meaning to those receiving it, or even worse, results in making things worse. It is best to hold your suggestions until they are asked for, or build those into collaborative efforts that don't come across as closed, but rather a collective effort. Lastly, start to work on incorporating silence into communication. If you find yourself starting to feel like you need to fill the silence, remember the impact of the opposite. Over talking and interrupting are viewed by most as rude and inconsiderate. Definitely not the message you want to send to colleagues and parents. While our presentation today focuses on things to think about and skills to build when you consider communicating with colleagues and parents of students, you must also consider how communication can play a critical part in your success here at ISU. As a college student, you will often have questions or concerns for your professors. In an effort to increase your thinking about this, my syllabus for this class gives some tips and suggestions for how to handle professional email communication with your professors. It may also be a good idea to think about only using email communication for things that can be answered quickly with a 2 to 3 line response. If the email will require a more lengthy response, it is likely best to request a meeting in person to discuss. For those face-to-face meetings, I can tell you that presenting yourself as a professional student will likely increase your success. Preparedness for professional meetings, including those with professors, should include bringing materials such as class notes and the course syllabus to the meeting and any other work you would like to discuss. Also, having a calendar or action plan for your next steps will likely be viewed favorably by those with whom you are trying to work. Lastly, don't forget nonverbal communication, even when meeting with a professor. While you may be nervous about going to talk to a professor about a concern or question, they are there to answer those questions and offer student meetings as a way to support your learning. Using the same nonverbal skills discussed in this presentation will help in not only your teacher meetings in the future, but those you can have on the student side of the relationship now. Good luck to all of you as you start working on these skills and start putting them into place. Soon, you will be developing your questions for your family interview and consider all of these skills when preparing for that interaction. Additionally, the next presentation you will watch is on interviewing skills to consider as you move toward the next stage in your careers.